From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where, as a wise man once said, there is only one letter of difference between purify and putrefy. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America and all ships at sea. Welcome to the Blast Radius. So glad you could join us this evening. Happy Birthing Persons Day to all you birthing persons out there. And aren't we all so much happier living in a new, more enlightened world where we no longer say hateful, transphobic, dehumanizing things like Happy Mother's Day? Here is your Decline of Western Civilization news roundup for the first full week of May 2024. Dateline Paris, Monday, 6 May. In a story with more layers of irony than it is healthy for one story to have, French President Emmanuel Macron and EU President Ursula von der Leyen, who has still got, in the opinion of this reporter, the greatest real-life comic book villain name of all time, brought in Chinese President Xi Jinping for a lavish state visit this week, during which they begged the dictator of the world's biggest communist regime to save them from Russia. Now, those of you fans keeping score at home might recall that the European coal and steel community, the original precursor organization of the odious, many-tentacled bureaucratic monster we now lovingly know as the European Union, first came into existence as a sort of Europe-only economic outgrowth of the NATO alliance. The thinking being that if we're going to militarily defeat Soviet communism when the time inevitably comes, then we'll need to be able to marshal our collective energy and industrial resources, namely coal and steel, toward that end. And now the EU is asking communist China for massive financial help in holding back the tide of Russian hegemony. Russia that's no longer communist since 33 years ago, and is such a formidable military threat that they can't defeat Ukraine despite having it surrounded from two sides on land and one side on sea, and they've been trying for 2 straight years. Like I said, if we tried to unpack all the layers of irony here, we might actually break the space-time continuum, so best to just move on to the next story, I think. Dateline The Hague, Tuesday, 7 May. In an all-too-rare instance of Europeans acting more like Americans than the Americans do, police in the Dutch capital arrested upwards of 125 idiot pro-Hamas protesters and then brought out the heavy equipment to quite literally bulldoze and steamroll with extreme prejudice the encampment they had established for their little terrorist cosplay party. And let's face it, the brute force heavy equipment approach is probably the right one when you are dealing with a piece of land on which young, entitled radical leftists have been sleeping rough for upwards of a week. I am reminded of the list of humanitarian aid relief that was put out by the little Hamasniks on the campus of the University of Chicago the other week. A list that included condoms, lube, abortion pills, and something called dental dams for oral sex. And my God, I'm still 41 days removed from turning 50, but I must be getting old because I do not have the faintest idea what a dental dam for oral sex is, and I don't think I want it explained to me either. The point being, when these people have been living on a patch of ground for longer than like 45 minutes, the correct approach when you clear them out is probably to bring out the bulldozers, remove at least the top 18 inches of topsoil, then bring in a hazmat team, then bring in a priest and an exorcist. Hell, you might as well grab a minister and a rabbi too. You never can be too careful. And afterward, in the interest of ecumenicalism, maybe they can all walk into a bar together. Dateline Washington, Wednesday, 8 May. Representatives Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia and Thomas Massie of Kentucky have released the full text of their bill with which they seek the vacating of the speakership of the House. I know it seems like these events can move pretty fast. After all, less than a year ago, we saw the installation of a brand new House Speaker, and everybody in the media flipped the hell out about him being a dangerous Christian nationalist who is obviously far too Trumpy. And then, on the very next episode of Extreme Political Makeover, Washington Edition, that same guy is an establishment deep state darling who is being kept in power at this point by the same opposition party that was declaring him an existential threat to democracy about 5 minutes ago. I'm not going to read out this entire thing because, shit, we might be here until midnight if we did that. You know how each clause in a House resolution begins with the word whereas? Let's just say this son of a bitch has got 31 whereases in it. But here are a couple of my selected favorites. Whereas, Mike Johnson sent the Republican conference a letter making promises as to what type of speaker he would be and outlining his plans going forward. Mike Johnson put forth 7 tenets that would guide the conference under his leadership. Number 1, restore trust by ensuring total transparency, open processes, and regular order. Number 2, advance a comprehensive policy agenda supported by conference consensus. Number 3, promote individual members and thus the whole team by working to understand and emphasize each member's unique strengths, district dynamics and challenges, and individual goals and objectives. Number 4, engage members in productive working groups to formulate solutions in key policy areas and enhance our internal communications and team building. Number 5, effectively message to persuasively inform the Republican base and the American people of our policy agenda, why we are pursuing it, and how it will ensure liberty, opportunity, and security for all Americans. Number 6, build and utilize external coalitions in the conservative ecosphere, including think tanks, policy groups, and other allied organizations that can contribute to our efforts. Number 7, develop and grow our majority by building upon our resources and expanding the base to successfully advance our conservative vision and agenda. Whereas Speaker Johnson has not lived up to a single one of his self-imposed tenets, whereas a 2-part omnibus split into 2 minibuses was crammed down our throats and passed under suspension of the rules, with only 1 day to review it, to which I can only add, whereas if American conservatives continue to place their hopes in a Republican Party that has done literally nothing in this century to advance the cause of conservatism, they should stop being surprised when stuff like this is always the end result. Dateline Berkeley, Thursday, 9 May. Leaders of the Berkeley Unified School District were hauled before the House Education and Workforce Subcommittee this week to address reports of rampant, virulent anti-Semitism breaking out in the public schools of that fair city that styles itself as and prides itself on being the most progressive, tolerant, inclusive city that Gaia the Earth Mother ever created. And how did the district's administrators respond to the allegation that their campuses are hotbed incubators of good old-fashioned Jew-hating? Well, come on, I think we both know how they responded. I think we have all seen this movie before. Because, yeah, you guessed it. They proclaimed the allegations totally 100% false, and they declared that the people making such allegations, well, they must be white supremacist patriarchs who just hate seeing strong, powerful black women in positions of power. I believe in the Platonic school of rhetoric in ancient Greece, they called that the Tiffany Henyard Gambit. No, damn it, I'm not the racist. The people who say I'm a racist are the damn racists. And best of luck with that strategy. I'm sure it's going to work out great, because when the race hatred in your district has reached such a fever pitch that you're actually being hauled before Congress to explain how you, as the authority figures in the district, allowed an educational environment to exist where Jewish children are being subjected on a daily basis to the sort of invective that would have been right at home in National Socialist Germany in the spring of 1938, the best play is to just hand-wave it away and accuse your opponents of making the whole thing up. In fact, I think it's probably all a Jewish conspiracy. Dateline London, Friday, 10 May. In a story that proves you're never too old to make a complete ass of yourself trying to impress the youngsters, 2 geriatric green extremists were arrested this week at the British Museum after they employed a hammer and chisel in an attempt to destroy the glass case covering one of the 4 extant copies of the Magna Carta. And I guess this is another case where we have no shortage of layers of irony, and not just because this was an 82-year-old and an 85-year-old trying to establish credibility with a movement, most of whose members were born after they had already reached retirement age, but also because, on a certain level, this is a more sensible and coherent act than these things normally are. For while on the surface, it might look like just a wanton act of destroying a precious historic object just for the sake of destroying it, this act of destruction actually comports pretty nicely with the modern woke radical leftist program. For after all, what was Magna Carta? Magna Carta is history's very first document in which it was ever codified the concept that government power is not supreme and unreviewable, but can be constrained by the granting or the withholding of the consent of the governed. Magna Carta gives us the kernel of the idea that later develops into the English Parliament, and that then is the wellspring of all the democratic institutions that exist on this bare planet today. And if there is anything we know about the woke radical left in the 21st century, it is that they absolutely love top-down brute force, unreviewable government power, the kind of power that only absolute monarchs used to wield. And they hate anything or anyone that stands in opposition to it. Did these two idiotic English grannies ever give it that much thought? I doubt it. But they're totally blowing up on TikTok. And that is what really matters. And with that, we have reached the end of the Decline of Western Civilization news roundup for the week that was. May it rest in peace. And now I lateral the ball to that fleet-footed tailback who turns the corner and takes it to the house for 6, my illustrious colleague, your lovely and talented co-host, the one and only, your friend and mine, Mr. Caucasian Sasquatch.